I never thought the words would come from my own son. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and fried eggs, the kind of ordinary morning that should have felt safe, but his tone sliced through it like glass. "Mom, we don't have space for you anymore." He said it as if he were asking me to pass the salt, casual, unemotional, already certain of my answer. Beside him, Vanessa leaned against the counter with her arms folded and her chin lifted. Her silence spoke louder than his words. It told me this was rehearsed, agreed upon, final. For a heartbeat, the room blurred. I felt as though I were floating outside my body, looking at the scene from above. There was Daniel, my boy who once begged me not to leave him on his first day of school, standing tall in the kitchen of the house I had helped him buy. There was Vanessa, her face composed in that way she wore whenever she wanted to hide satisfaction under the guise of politeness. And there was me, the unwanted shadow taking up space in their tidy suburban dream, the woman who had given them everything and was now asked to disappear. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask if he truly understood what he was saying, but the words refused to form. Instead, my mouth curved into a smile, the smallest lift of the lips that felt both bitter and strangely calm. I nodded once, and then I turned away before either of them could see the storm behind my eyes. The hallway to my room felt longer than usual. My footsteps echoed against the wooden floor, and each sound reminded me that this was not my home, not in their eyes. When I pushed open the door to the small space they had given me, the guest suite as they liked to call it, the air inside was cool and impersonal. A twin bed pushed against the wall, a nightstand with a lamp that flickered when the cord bent wrong, a half bath without a shower. It had been enough for me because I told myself presence mattered more than comfort. I had convinced myself that hearing voices upstairs, laughter down the hall, footsteps rushing in the morning was worth any sacrifice. But standing there now, I saw the truth. They had never meant for me to stay. My hands moved mechanically. I pulled the suitcase from under the bed, the same red one I had carried from one chapter of life to another. The zipper screeched as it opened, revealing folded shirts, a paperback book with its spine broken halfway, a framed photo of James, my late husband, smiling at the beach. I began to pack. Each shirt folded carefully, each item placed with precision. It felt ritualistic, like preparing for a journey I had not planned but somehow had always expected. I did not cry. I did not shake. I thought perhaps I had no tears left for this house. My life had been filled with goodbyes that tore me open, but this was different. This was not grief. This was clarity. When my fingers brushed the very bottom of the suitcase, they met resistance. Something flat, stiff, forgotten to anyone but me. I pulled it free. A folder, bright red, corners worn, edges frayed. I held it against my chest for a moment before opening it. And there it was, the truth in black ink and legal stamps. The deed, my name written beside Daniel's, co-owner. 49% of the house they now told me I had no place in. I stared at it until the letters blurred. They had no idea. They had convinced themselves that I was temporary, disposable, an old woman lucky to be given a twin bed and a half bath. They had forgotten or perhaps chosen to ignore that without me there would be no house. Without the money I poured into their dream, they would still be wandering from apartment to apartment, begging banks for loans. I had been the foundation beneath their feet. And now, with one sentence, they had kicked me aside. I slipped the folder back into the suitcase, tucked beneath clothes as if it were an ordinary belonging. But inside my chest something shifted. The fear that had sat heavy on my ribs for months cracked open and let something else breathe through. Not anger, not yet, but something colder and steadier. A sense that the story unfolding was not the story they believed it to be. I zipped the suitcase shut and sat on the bed. The mattress dipped beneath me, hard and unwelcoming. Through the thin walls I could hear muffled laughter from upstairs, Vanessa's voice followed by Daniel. They were already moving on, already celebrating a victory they thought was complete. They didn't know that with one folder I held the power to unravel everything. I looked around the small room that had been mine. The quilt I had brought from my old house lay folded at the foot of the bed, still smelling faintly of lavender. On the nightstand, the photograph of James watched me with patient eyes. I touched the frame gently. He had always warned me not to give too much, not to let love blind me to the selfishness of others. But I had ignored him because Daniel was our son, our only child. How could I not give him everything I had when his future seemed to depend on it? Now, sitting there in silence, I wondered if James had seen this ending long before I did. The clock on the wall ticked louder with each second. I realized I was waiting, though I didn't know for what. Perhaps for Daniel to knock on the door, to soften his words, to take back what had been said. perhaps for Vanessa to slip in with an apology crafted out of guilt. But the hallway remained silent. They had made their choice. I was no longer part of the picture they wanted to frame for the world. I rose and closed the suitcase. It was heavier than I remembered, or maybe I was simply older than I allowed myself to admit. I dragged it to the door and paused with my hand on the knob. The air in the hallway felt different when I stepped out, as if the house itself exhaled in relief. I carried the suitcase through the silent space, past the living room with its spotless furniture, past the staircase that led to the rooms I would never see again. Each step carried me farther not just from the house, but from the illusion I had clung to. By the time I reached the front door, I knew something had ended. Not just a morning, not just a conversation, but an entire chapter of life. And though my hands trembled as I adjusted the suitcase handle, my mind was strangely calm. I had been told there was no space for me. What they did not know was that sometimes being pushed out is the only way to discover the strength you had been holding all along. I stood at the front door with my suitcase and looked once more around the space I had helped to build. The walls were painted in muted shades of white and gray, modern and sleek, chosen by Vanessa from glossy magazines. The furniture was perfectly arranged, nothing out of place, as if the house itself had been staged for strangers instead of lived in by a family. I remembered the day they first showed me the keys. Daniel's smile had been wide, Vanessa's arms had wrapped around me as she whispered, "We'll never forget this. You'll always have a place here." That promise rang in my ears now, bitter and hollow. I opened the door and stepped outside. The morning light was sharp and clear, the air heavy with the scent of cut grass from the neighbor's lawn. I pulled the suitcase down the path and sat on the porch steps for a moment. My heart was steady, but a strange heaviness pressed against my chest. It was not grief in the way I had known grief when I lost James. This was quieter, more clinical. As if something inside me had already decided the truth, I was no longer their mother in the way I had been, I was no longer family in the way I had imagined. I was a name on a deed and a shadow in their perfect life, nothing more. I watched as a car passed, a young couple inside laughing with windows down. The world kept moving, indifferent to my private undoing. I clutched the suitcase handle tighter and whispered to myself, "Just keep walking." My cab was already on its way. I had called it from the corner of the room before I packed the last of my belongings. Something in me had known I would need an exit long before the words were spoken. As I waited on the porch, my mind drifted back through fragments of memory. I remembered Daniel as a boy running across a soccer field, tripping over his own shoes but laughing anyway. I remembered nights working double shifts at the hospital, only to come home and find him asleep on the couch with a blanket pulled to his chin. I remembered James placing a gentle hand on my shoulder and saying, "You're giving too much. Save something for yourself," but I had given it all anyway. What was a mother if not someone who carried the weight for her child? The cab pulled into the driveway, a dull yellow car that looked older than I was. The driver leaned against the horn once, impatient. I rose, lifted the suitcase, and walked toward it without glancing back. The house loomed behind me, its pristine walls and spotless windows gleaming like the set of a play I was no longer cast in. As I reached the car, I felt the folder inside the suitcase shift, pressing against the fabric. A reminder, a silent companion, a weapon if I chose to use it. The driver opened the trunk and I slid the suitcase inside. As I lowered myself into the back seat, the leather cracked beneath me, worn and tired. The door shut with a heavy click, and the house disappeared behind tinted glass. I exhaled, long and slow, and let the silence settle. The ride stretched on without conversation. The city passed in flashes, billboards and intersections, people carrying groceries and children tugging at their mother's hands. I pressed my forehead against the cool window and thought about the strange comfort of anonymity. Out here no one knew me, no one saw the woman who had just been cast out of her own investment. To them I was only another passenger, another middle-aged woman clutching her bag too tightly, staring at nothing. I slipped a hand into the suitcase beside me and felt the folder again. My thumb traced the edges of the deed inside. Power, proof, the truth that Daniel and Vanessa had ignored. I could destroy them with this, I thought, and the realization startled me. Not because it was untrue, but because of how calm it made me feel. I was not plotting revenge. I was not fantasizing about ruin. I was simply acknowledging reality. They thought they had closed a door on me, but they had only sealed themselves inside a house that could collapse at any moment. And I was holding the match. The cab rolled to a stop outside a cheap motel. The neon sign buzzed faintly, its letters half burned out. I paid the driver, lifted the suitcase, and climbed the stairs to a second-floor room with peeling paint. The key turned stiffly in the lock. Inside, the air smelled faintly of fried onions and bleach. Bed stood against the wall, its comforter faded. A small table with a lamp leaned slightly to one side. It was not home, not by any stretch, but it was space. My space. The irony struck me as I set the suitcase down and looked around. They said they had no room for me. Yet here, in this plain little room, I finally felt the air belonged to me. I pulled the folder from the suitcase and laid it on the bed. For several minutes, I simply stared at it, the red cover glowing against the dull sheets. I thought about tearing it apart, thought about burning it, thought about erasing every tie between myself and that house. But I didn't. I placed my hand flat against it and whispered to the empty room, they don't know what's coming. The silence that followed was thick and strangely comforting. No footsteps above me, no forced smiles at the dinner table, no tense exchanges in the hallway, only the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of a television through the wall. I closed my eyes and listened. For the first time in months, maybe years, the quiet belonged to me. I opened my suitcase again and pulled out the framed photo of James. I placed it on the nightstand and adjusted the lamp so that his face caught the light. His smile looked patient, as if he had been waiting for me to realize something important. Maybe he had known all along that love could blind me, that loyalty could chain me to people who saw me only as a resource. Maybe he had trusted I would one day see what he had seen. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. My body felt heavy, but my mind felt strangely light. I replayed Daniel's words again. We don't have space for you anymore. Over and over, until they lost their sting and became only sounds, meaningless syllables strung together by a man who had once been my little boy. A boy who used to cling to my hand in crowded places. A boy who cried when I left for night shifts. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who looked at me and saw inconvenience. And I realized something then. Perhaps this was not the end of family. Perhaps this was the end of an illusion I should have let go of long ago. I turned to the folder once more, tracing the edges with my fingertip. I whispered softly into the room, let them think they've won. Let them believe I'm gone. They have no idea the ground they're standing on is already crumbling. And with that, I closed my eyes and allowed the silence to wrap around me like a blanket. The world outside could wait. Tomorrow could wait. Tonight was mine. The red folder never left my sight that night. I kept it on the nightstand beside James's picture, the two things that reminded me of who I once was and what I still carried. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, and every so often my eyes drifted back to that folder. It was more than just paper and ink. It was a lifeline. It was proof that I was not invisible, not as powerless as they believed. I reached over and opened it, letting the crisp pages breathe in the stale motel air. My name stared back at me in bold letters. Madeline Russell, co-owner. 49% of a house that had been sold to me as a dream of family and togetherness. My signature at the bottom, written in the same blue ink I used to sign permission slips when Daniel was a boy. I touched the curve of my name, the letters shaped with the same care I had given every part of his life. That signature had once been an act of love. Now it looked more like a reminder of betrayal. As I studied the document, my mind pulled me backward. The memories didn't come in neat order. They arrived in flashes, sharp and vivid, like postcards from a life that no longer existed. I saw James's face in the hospital bed, pale and tired, his hand gripping mine as if holding on to more than breath. I remembered the night he slipped away and the quiet that filled the room after the machines went still. That was the first time silence had felt heavy, suffocating, almost unbearable. But out of that grief came determination. I told myself I would do everything to protect Daniel, to make sure his life carried on strong and secure. When the insurance payout arrived, I didn't think twice. $180,000, a sum that looked immense on paper, but in my heart it was already spoken for. Daniel had just married Vanessa, and they had been rejected by the bank when they tried for a mortgage. I can still hear his voice on the phone, broken, ashamed, telling me the dream was slipping away. And I can still hear myself answering, "Don't worry, we'll make it happen. It's your future, Daniel. It's our family's stability." I signed the check with trembling hands, imagining James beside me, shaking his head with gentle warning. But I believed in promises, and Daniel promised me I would always have a home with them. Vanessa hugged me with tears in her eyes. "You'll never regret this, Madeline. You'll always be welcome." Her words sounded sweet enough to make me believe. Daniel kissed my cheek and whispered, "You'll never have to lift a finger again." I tucked those promises into my heart and let them guide me. The memory blurred into the day we first walked into the house together. White walls, gleaming floors, a kitchen so perfect it looked untouched. Vanessa twirled in the living room, declaring it would be the space for family holidays. Daniel lifted his phone to take a picture of the three of us, arms linked, smiling wide. I felt hope swelling inside me, believing I had secured not just a house but a future of belonging. But even then, small cracks had begun to show. My room was downstairs, separated from theirs, outfitted with a twin bed and no closet. A guest room, they called it, though I was no guest. I told myself it didn't matter. I was simply grateful for the sound of footsteps in the morning, for the laughter that drifted down from the second floor. The first few days, Daniel made me coffee. Vanessa showed me how to use their smart thermostat, though her sighs grew heavier each time I asked for help. Once we shared dinner at the same table. Only once. After that, schedules shifted. Excuses multiplied. Silence grew. I shut the folder and rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of those memories pressing down. It wasn't sudden. That was the cruelest part. They hadn't turned on me overnight. It happened slowly, like water seeping into cracks of stone. A joke Vanessa made at a party about living with 2 kids and a grandma. Daniel's groan when I asked to install a small shelf in the laundry room. The padlock that appeared on the upstairs refrigerator explained away as meal prepping. The modem moved upstairs, leaving my Netflix useless for days. Each small thing might have been forgivable on its own. Together, they painted a picture that I had refused to see until it was undeniable. I remembered the night I overheard Vanessa on the phone, her voice hushed but sharp. "She's sweet, but we need our own life. This isn't sustainable." I had frozen in the hallway, holding a laundry basket, my ears burning. I told myself it was stress, that she didn't mean it. But then came the morning I heard Daniel say, "She won't leave if we're nice. We have to make her uncomfortable. We have to push her out." And Vanessa's answer cut me deeper than any knife. "She won't sign her share over unless she feels unwanted. Make her feel like she doesn't belong." I closed my eyes against the sting of that memory. The folder lay heavy in my lap, its truth undeniable. I had built their dream and they had conspired to erase me from it. In the motel room, the silence was different than the silence in that house. It was not suffocating. It was not tense with judgment. Here it was mine, and as I breathed it in, I realized I was not broken. I was bruised, yes. Wounded, absolutely. But there was a difference between being broken and being finished. And I was not finished. Not yet. I placed the folder back on the nightstand, folded my quilt over the bed, and whispered into the quiet, "They think they have written me out. But they don't understand. My name is still on the page." I woke up before dawn, the light outside the motel window still gray and muted. For a moment, I forgot where I was. The hum of traffic sounded distant, unfamiliar, and the sheets beneath me smelled of detergent too harsh to be home. Then my eyes found the red folder on the nightstand and James's picture beside it. Reality returned like a tide washing over me. I was not in my son's house. I was in a rented room with a suitcase and a memory of betrayal. I sat up slowly, rubbing my arms against the chill. My fingers drifted once again to the folder. I had never been one to hoard documents. My life had always been about people, about care, about giving. But that folder was different. It held not only proof of ownership but proof of who I had been. A woman who had sacrificed for her family. A woman who had believed in promises. I opened it once more and looked at the lines of my signature. The ink had not faded, even though months had passed since I signed. As I stared, the room around me seemed to dissolve, and I was transported again to that day when everything began. Daniel and Vanessa had sat across from me at the kitchen table of my old house, their faces tight with worry. "We were denied," Daniel had said, running a hand through his hair. "The bank doesn't think we qualify." Vanessa's eyes had glistened with frustrated tears. "It was supposed to be our start," she whispered, "the place where we'd build a family." I remember leaning back in my chair, my hands trembling slightly. I wanted to tell them it would be fine, that another chance would come. But then I saw the fear in Daniel's eyes, the same boyish fear I had seen when he broke his arm at age 10, when he got lost in the grocery store, when he failed his first exam. That fear melted me, just as it always had. I couldn't bear to let him carry it, so I said the words that sealed my fate. "I'll help you." The relief on their faces was immediate. Vanessa reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Daniel let out a laugh, half disbelieving, half grateful. "We'll never forget this, Mom. We'll make you proud." And in that moment, pride filled me. I thought I was doing the right thing. The check was written within a week. $180,000. the payout from James's life insurance. I had hesitated only once, holding the pen above the paper, remembering James's warnings. He had always been cautious, always reminding me that love could not replace prudence. But then I thought of Daniel's future, of the stability he deserved, and I pressed the pen down. My signature sprawled across the line, firm and certain. I blinked and the motel room came back into view. My hand was trembling, gripping the folder too tightly. I set it down, exhaled, and stood to make coffee with the small machine in the corner. The bitter scent filled the room, reminding me of mornings in the old house before everything soured. I sipped slowly, letting the heat steady me, and allowed my mind to wander further into the past. The day we moved into the new house returned to me with piercing clarity. The walls gleamed, the air smelled of fresh paint, and Vanessa danced from room to room as if she had been waiting her whole life for that moment. Daniel hugged me hard, whispering, "You'll never need to worry again." I had believed him, so deeply that the words still echoed inside me like a broken promise. My room was not much, but I told myself it was enough. I brought my quilt from the old bedroom, the one James and I had shared for years. I placed the framed photo of him on the nightstand. It felt like I was carrying pieces of him with me, stitching his memory into the new space. I wanted to believe it was a home, even if it wasn't entirely mine. The first nights were almost hopeful. Daniel made me coffee in the mornings, Vanessa asked me questions about the thermostat and how I liked my room. We even had one dinner together, all three of us at the same table, smiling politely, sharing stories. But that was the only dinner. After that, life shifted. Excuses were made. Meals were eaten separately. Their laughter drifted from upstairs while I sat alone with reheated leftovers. I remember the small humiliations most vividly. The refrigerator upstairs suddenly locked with a padlock. Vanessa explained it was for meal prepping, but her eyes slid away from mine. The modem moved to the upstairs office. My Netflix froze for days until I finally gave up. Each change was presented as practical, reasonable, but each one chipped at my sense of belonging. The night I overheard them talking was the night my illusions truly cracked. I had been walking toward the kitchen to make tea when I heard Daniel's voice. "She won't leave if we're nice. We have to push her out." Vanessa's reply was sharper, crueler. "She won't sign her share over unless she feels unwanted. Make her feel like she doesn't belong." I had frozen in place, my body pressed against the wall, my heart pounding so loudly I feared they would hear. My son, my only son, the boy I had raised alone after James died, the boy I had poured everything into. He was plotting with his wife to erase me, to shove me out of the very home I had given them. I returned to my room that night in silence. I sat on the edge of the twin bed and stared at the wallpaper I had helped Vanessa pick out only days earlier. My hands shook as I held the shoebox filled with every birthday card Daniel had made me as a child. I thought about soccer games and lost teeth, about nights spent in the emergency room, about the way he used to run into my arms. All of that, and now I was nothing more than an obstacle. In the motel, I pressed my hand against the folder as if it could ground me. I thought of that moment in the hallway, the way my chest had tightened, the way my mind had screamed to do something, to say something. But I had not. I had stayed silent, smiling when Vanessa mentioned converting the den into a nursery, smiling when Daniel avoided my gaze, smiling while my heart cracked. And now, in this small rented room, I understood why. Silence had become my weapon. They thought it was weakness, but it was not. It was patience. It was calculation. It was survival. I closed the folder and set it down. I poured the rest of the coffee into the sink and rinsed the mug. My reflection in the glass of the window looked older than I remembered, but also steadier. Stronger. They thought they had made me powerless, but they had no idea. The truth was still mine, and it was only a matter of time before it surfaced. The memories would always sting, but they no longer held me captive. I whispered to myself, almost like a vow, "This is not where my story ends." I did not sleep much that night. The hum of the motel air conditioner was steady, but my mind was restless. Every time I closed my eyes, the old house rose before me. White walls, gray floors, a staircase leading to rooms that were never mine. And the voices. Daniel's voice low and practical, Vanessa's sharp with impatience. Make her feel like she doesn't belong. The words burrowed into me like splinters I could not remove. I sat up in bed before the sun rose and reached for my journal, a notebook I had packed without even realizing why. I opened to the first page and wrote slowly, "Today they told me there was no space for me." My hand trembled as the ink flowed, but once the first sentence was down, the rest followed like water through a cracked dam. I wrote about the moment in the kitchen, about the red suitcase, about the folder. I wrote about the silence, the weight of it, the way it wrapped around me not as punishment but as armor. By the time I looked up, the sun was painting the sky pale gold, and my chest felt lighter. The page did not answer back, but at least it listened. As the day stretched forward, I let my mind wander again to the years before. It is strange how memory works. The painful parts arrive first, sharp and insistent, but then, if you're brave enough to keep looking, the tender ones emerge too. I saw myself younger, holding Daniel's hand as we crossed busy streets. His small fingers curled tightly around mine, trusting me to guide him safely. I remembered rushing to the emergency room when he was 7, his arm bent awkwardly after a fall from a tree. He looked up at me with tears streaking his face and whispered, "Don't leave me." And I hadn't. Not then, not ever. Until he left me in a way that felt worse than any wound. The memory shifted to James. My husband's voice was softer than mine, always carrying calm even in the hardest moments. He had been the anchor, the steady presence that kept me from drifting too far into worry. When he died, the world tilted. For months I felt as though I were walking on uneven ground, unsure of every step. But Daniel had been there, needing me, giving me reason to push forward. That need kept me breathing when grief might have suffocated me. I thought of the life insurance payout again. The envelope had been thick, filled with numbers that seemed both heavy and meaningless. Money cannot replace a life, but it can carve a path. I told myself it was a gift from James to Daniel, a way of securing his son's future. That was how I justified it. That was how I silenced the voice that whispered I might need it one day for myself. I remembered the look on Vanessa's face when I handed them the check. Gratitude painted over with relief, her smile stretching wide enough to convince even me. She hugged me tightly, her perfume clinging to my sweater. "You'll always have a place with us," she promised, her words dripping with sincerity. I wanted to believe her. Daniel kissed my cheek, his eyes shining, and said, "Mom, you'll never need to lift a finger again." Promises, words that crumbled faster than paper in the rain. The motel room was dim, but I lit the small lamp and placed James's photo beneath it. His eyes seemed to follow me, reminding me of all the times he had warned me not to give everything away. He used to say, "Madeline, you can't pour from an empty cup. Save something for yourself." I never listened. I thought being a good mother meant emptying myself completely, giving without question, sacrificing without pause. I thought one day the love would circle back, that the loyalty I had shown would be returned when I needed it most. Now I saw how wrong I had been. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The parking lot stretched below, lit by flickering lamps. A man smoked near his car, his face half hidden by shadow. A woman carried groceries up the stairs, her child trailing behind. Strangers, all of them. Yet somehow I felt closer to them than to the people I had once called family. They would not betray me. They could not. They didn't hold that power. I turned back to the folder and opened it again, reading every line as if it might reveal something new. It didn't. The words were the same, my name, my percentage, my claim, but what changed was how I saw it. Not as a gift I had given Daniel, but as proof of my existence, of my part in the story. They could lock fridges, move modems, make jokes at my expense. They could push me out the door, but they could not erase my name from these pages. I closed the folder with care and set it aside. My hands trembled less now. I felt a new kind of steadiness rising in me, a quiet resolve. I did not know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing clearly. I was not powerless. They had mistaken silence for weakness. They would learn silence could also be strength. That thought carried me into the next day. The next morning came with a thin drizzle that blurred the motel window. Drops clung to the glass and slid down in crooked lines, tracing patterns that reminded me of tears. I sat on the edge of the bed with a cup of bitter coffee and watched the rain fall. My reflection stared back at me, pale and tired but steady. I thought about how many mornings I had sat at the kitchen table in Daniel's house, waiting for voices upstairs, waiting for signs that I belonged. Here in this plain room, no one's approval determined my worth. The silence was mine, and though it was heavy, it was honest. As I sipped the last of the coffee, another wave of memory washed over me. It came uninvited, like a film reel flickering across the inside of my eyelids. I was back in the living room of the new house on the very first week. Vanessa had been showing me swatches of paint for the nursery she already planned, even though there was no baby yet. She laughed, bright and animated, as she held each color against the wall. Daniel watched her with admiration, his arm around her shoulders. For a moment I had felt warmth bloom inside me. They looked happy. They looked like a family. But then Vanessa turned to me and said, almost casually, "Maybe we should keep this space just for us, Madeline. Your room downstairs is perfect, isn't it? Her tone was light, but her eyes lingered, sharp and assessing. At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself she wanted privacy, that it was normal for young couples to carve out their own corner. I ignored the twinge in my chest. Weeks later, I heard Daniel explaining to a friend on the phone that his mother was staying with them temporarily. Temporarily. The word burned. I had given them permanence, yet he offered me only a temporary existence. I remembered another evening when I had tried to cook dinner. I prepared James's favorite recipe, roast chicken with rosemary and lemon, hoping to bring a piece of our old family into this new one. The smell filled the kitchen, and for a brief while I felt useful again. But when Daniel and Vanessa came home, Vanessa wrinkled her nose. "We already ate out," she said quickly, setting down a takeout bag. Daniel kissed her cheek, avoiding my eyes. I ate alone that night, the chicken cooling on the counter. These moments stacked up, quiet bricks in a wall that slowly shut me out. Each one by itself might have been forgivable. Together, they built a fortress of exclusion, and I was left outside, knocking at a door that never opened. In the motel room, I placed the coffee mug on the nightstand and let my fingers trace the frame of James's picture. I whispered to him, "You would have seen it sooner. You would have known." I wished he could have guided me, told me when to stop giving, when to draw the line. But he was gone, and I had crossed the line long before I realized it. I thought again of the night I overheard them plotting. The way Daniel's voice had carried through the vents, practical and detached. "She won't leave if we're nice. We have to make her uncomfortable." And Vanessa, her tone sharper, more decisive. "She won't sign her share over unless she feels unwanted. Make her feel like she doesn't belong." Those words were carved into my memory as if etched in stone. That was the moment the illusions shattered. That was the night I understood I was not family to them. I was leverage. I was an obstacle to be removed. I rose and paced the room, the floor creaking beneath me. Anger threatened to rise, but it never fully took hold. Instead, what I felt was colder, steadier. It was clarity. I had spent so many years letting emotions steer me: grief, love, hope, fear. Now all that was left was something quieter, the simple knowledge of truth. They had used me. They had betrayed me. And yet, without me, they had nothing. I returned to the bed and opened the red folder again. The papers smelled faintly of ink and dust, familiar and grounding. My eyes traced the words until I could recite them from memory. Co-owner, 49%, Madeline Russell. Each phrase was a reminder that they had underestimated me. They thought pushing me out of the house meant pushing me out of the story. But I was still there, my name written into the very bones of their dream. The rain outside eased into a drizzle and light filtered through the clouds. I closed the folder and set it beside James's photo. For a long moment, I simply sat in silence, breathing deeply, letting the steadiness settle. That was when I felt it, the faintest spark of something new. Not revenge, not yet, but a sense of possibility. A sense that my story was not ending in that motel room. It was only shifting, preparing for something I could not yet name. I whispered to the empty room, "They don't know what's coming." And as the words left my lips, I believed them. The morning after the rain, I felt stronger than I had in weeks. Something in me had shifted, and though my body ached from the stiff motel bed, my mind was clear. I made a cup of weak coffee from the machine in the corner and sat at the small table, staring at the red folder once again. It was not just paper anymore. It was a reminder that no matter what they said, no matter how they treated me, my place in this story was undeniable. I was gathering my thoughts when my phone rang. The screen lit with an unfamiliar number. For a second, I considered ignoring it, but something inside urged me to answer. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, rehearsed. "Mrs. Russell, this is a courtesy call regarding the property at 214 Summerfield Lane." My stomach tightened. The house. Their house. My house. The voice continued, reading from a script, mentioning terms I knew only vaguely: loan defaults, payment schedules, outstanding balances. My grip on the phone tightened. I asked them to slow down, to repeat. And then the words came clear as bells: "The property is in danger of foreclosure." For a long moment I could not speak. Foreclosure. The word echoed in my head, hollow and terrifying. I felt the floor tilt beneath me as if the motel room were sliding away. I forced myself to ask the only question I could manage. "How is that possible?" The voice explained. A second mortgage had been taken out against the property, large sums borrowed, payments missed. The account was now in arrears. I closed my eyes and pressed a hand against my chest. I could see it so clearly. Daniel, desperate, chasing another business venture. Vanessa urging him on, promising it would succeed. Paperwork signed quickly, carelessly, never once mentioning it to me. They had used the house as collateral, my name included on the deed, yet they never thought to ask, never thought to warn. I asked when the payments had stopped. The voice told me it had been months. Months of silence. Months while they smiled in my face, locked their refrigerator, whispered in hallways, planned my departure. All while the ground beneath them was crumbling. When the call ended, I sat frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence again, but it sounded different now. Sharper, colder. My hands shook as I set the phone down. The red folder lay open on the table, the deed staring back at me, my name alongside Daniel, my share tied to a debt I had never agreed to. 1,000 emotions rose at once. Shock, betrayal, fear, but above all, something steadier. A quiet, calculated calm. They thought they had pushed me out. They thought they had taken everything from me. But the truth was simpler, harsher. They had taken everything from themselves. I rose and paced the room, the carpet rough beneath my bare feet. I whispered aloud, tasting the words. They're going to lose it, the house, their dream, all of it. I thought of Vanessa's smirk the morning she stood by Daniel's side, telling me there was no room for me anymore. I thought of Daniel's eyes, cold and distant, so unlike the boy I had raised. They had believed they were powerful in that moment, but now I saw the truth. Their power was an illusion. Their foundation was already cracked. I sat back down and stared at the folder. I could intervene. I could call the bank, offer to cover the arrears, save the house. I had some savings left, a modest cushion I had built carefully over the years. I could use it, and the house would be secure again. Daniel and Vanessa would never know how close they came to losing everything. They would keep living in their perfect suburban dream, the story neatly patched over. But as I thought of it, I felt a cold wave of clarity wash over me. No, not this time. I had poured out everything I had, and they had met it with cruelty. They had treated me as disposable. And now, when their world was crumbling, I realized something powerful. I had no obligation to save them. For the first time in years, I felt no guilt in thinking of myself first. I whispered to the empty room, almost testing the sound of it. Let it fall. The words rang through the silence, steady and true. I left the phone on the table and walked to the window. Outside, the drizzle had stopped, and the parking lot shimmered under a pale sun. Cars came and went, people hurried about their lives, unaware that in this small motel room a woman had just made a decision that would change everything. My reflection in the glass looked older, lined with exhaustion, but behind the weariness there was something else. Resolve. I pressed my palm to the cool window and whispered again, let it fall. The words steadied me. They were not cruel, not even angry. They were simple truth. The house was never truly mine, not in the way I had hoped. It had been built on promises that rotted before the paint dried. If it was destined to collapse, I would not be the one to hold it up. I sat back down at the table and opened the folder once more. The deed stared back at me, my name written clearly beside Daniel's. My share of the house tied me to the debt, but the woman on the phone had explained something else. They could move forward if I signed a release, giving up my claim, allowing foreclosure to proceed without me. I could remove myself from the ruin, step aside while the walls came crashing down. I traced the curve of my signature on the page, remembering the day I had signed with trembling hands, believing I was securing a future. Now another signature could end it all. The irony almost made me laugh. My mind wandered to Daniel. I pictured his face when he realized the truth, when the notices arrived, when the furniture was taken, when the locks were changed. I wondered if he would blame me, if Vanessa would twist the story to cast me once again as the villain. Perhaps they would. Perhaps they already had. But the difference now was that I no longer cared. Their story was not mine to protect. I remembered the moment in the kitchen when they told me there was no space for me anymore. How calm Daniel's voice had been, how proud Vanessa had looked. They thought they were winning, thought they had finally removed the burden of me from their lives. They had no idea they were already standing on sinking sand. I felt almost sorry for them in that moment. Almost. I imagined what James would say if he were here. He had always been kinder than I was, always ready to forgive. But even he had warned me not to give too much. I pictured him shaking his head, his voice gentle but firm. Madeline, you can't save them from themselves. I whispered into the silence, you're right, James. Not this time. The hours stretched on, but my decision never wavered. I showered, dressed, and folded the quilt at the foot of the bed. I packed the few things I had taken out of the suitcase, placing James's photo carefully between layers of clothes. The folder I left on top, its red cover bright against the muted fabric. It felt like carrying a flame, small but powerful, ready to burn away the illusions I had lived under for too long. As evening settled, I walked outside and stood on the motel balcony. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of asphalt after rain. Lights flickered on across the lot, neon buzzing faintly. I leaned against the railing and watched people move through their own lives. A man carried a pizza box under his arm. A child dragged a toy car across the pavement. A woman laughed into her phone. Ordinary lives, ordinary struggles. I felt both distant and connected, as if I were standing at the edge of something new. I thought again of the house. I imagined it standing empty, windows boarded, grass overgrown. I imagined Vanessa scrolling through her phone, searching for sympathy, spinning stories of betrayal. I imagined Daniel sitting in silence, his pride shattered, realizing too late that the person he had cast aside was the one who had held everything together. A strange peace settled over me then. I was not celebrating their loss. I was not dancing on the ruins. I was simply letting go. For years I had carried the weight of their lives on my shoulders. Now I was setting it down. I whispered into the night air, "They will learn, and I will live." Back in the room, I set the folder beside James's photo one last time before turning off the lamp. The room sank into darkness, but for the first time in years, the darkness did not frighten me. It felt like a blank page, waiting for new words. I lay down on the stiff mattress, pulled the quilt over me, and closed my eyes. The house would fall, let it, I would not. The foreclosure notice came faster than I expected. A plain envelope slipped under my motel room door one morning, my name typed neatly above the address in a bold, impersonal font. I sat on the bed for a long time staring at it, unwilling to touch it, as though the paper itself might burn me. Finally, I tore it open with a shaking hand. The words leapt from the page. Default. Repossession. Foreclosure. Each one struck like a hammer blow. I read and reread the sentences, my eyes tracing the black ink until the letters blurred together. It was official. The house was slipping away. Not because of me, not because of anything I had done, because Daniel and Vanessa had borrowed too much, promised too much, believed too much, and now they were losing everything. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into its envelope. I placed it on the small motel table and sat beside it, my fingers drumming against the cheap wood. My heart was steady. The choice had already been made. I had decided to step back, to let the collapse happen. But what I had not expected was how quickly silence would be twisted into something uglier. It began the way most storms begin these days, on a glowing screen. I don't use social media anymore, not since James died. The constant scrolling, the endless comparisons, the shallow chatter, it never appealed to me, but Vanessa thrives there. She has always known how to shape her image, how to bend her life into neat little squares that look perfect to strangers. And now she was bending me. Her first post appeared 2 days after the foreclosure notice. I didn't see it myself. A neighbor I hadn't spoken to in months sent me a screenshot, her message dripping with pity. "Thought you should know, Madeline." The image showed the house, its front lawn glowing green under the afternoon sun. Her caption was a performance written for applause. Sometimes the people you trust the most turn out to be the ones who cut you deepest. We opened our home, we gave everything we had, and when we needed love in return, we were abandoned. No names, no direct accusations, but everyone knew. The comments bloomed like weeds. "Oh honey, stay strong. Some people don't appreciate what they have. Family can be the cruelest. You two deserve so much better." Heart emojis, sad faces, prayers, little bursts of outrage typed by people who had never once stepped foot in that house, who had never seen what I had given. At first I told myself it didn't matter. Let them talk. Let strangers believe what they want. They didn't know me. They never would. But then more messages arrived. A cousin from another state sent me a link to a local blog that had picked up the story, framing it as a modern tragedy. A young couple betrayed by an ungrateful parent. The blog didn't use my name either, but the details were enough. Anyone who knew us would know exactly who they meant. And then the calls began. A woman from church, her voice brittle with judgment, asking if the rumors were true. A distant friend of James's, sounding almost gleeful as he asked if I had really abandoned my only child. Each word was another stone added to the weight on my chest. I tried to keep calm. I tried to remind myself that lies don't change the truth. But late at night, in the motel room's stale silence, doubt crept in. What if the truth doesn't matter? What if all that matters is the story people believe? I paced the room until my legs ached. I argued with Vanessa in my head, crafting speeches I would never give. I imagined standing in front of all those people, waving the red folder, shouting until they understood. But when I looked at my reflection in the motel mirror, I saw only a tired woman no one wanted to hear. Vanessa was young, beautiful, clever with words. Her lies slid smoothly into ears ready for scandal. My truth was heavier, clumsier. It didn't sparkle. It didn't trend. One night, after another round of screenshots appeared on my phone, I sat at the table with James's photo propped against the lamp. His face was steady, calm, untouched by all of this. I whispered to him, "They're making me into a monster. They're telling the world I ruined them." His silence filled the room, but in that silence I almost heard his voice, deep and patient. "You know the truth, Madeline, that has to be enough." But was it? I pressed my hands flat against the table, staring at the red folder. Inside were the documents, the numbers, the signatures, the undeniable proof that I had given everything. Proof that without me there would have been no house to lose. Proof that their perfect dream had been built on the foundation of my sacrifice. And yet the folder sat closed, silent, while Vanessa's lies filled the air like wildfire. I imagined her typing late at night, carefully choosing words that painted her as the victim. I imagined Daniel sitting beside her, nodding, letting her press publish. Did he believe it too? Did he convince himself that I had abandoned him, that I had failed him? Or did he know the truth and choose silence, letting her voice cover his shame? The thought hollowed me out. The boy I had raised, the boy I had carried through every storm, letting lies grow because it was easier than facing the truth. I closed my eyes and whispered to the dark, maybe silence is no longer enough. For now, though, I remained still. The world outside could believe whatever story it wanted. I would hold on to the truth a little longer. But deep inside me, something stirred, a small flame flickering awake. A certainty that when the time came, I would not let their lies be the last word. The lies spread like ivy. Slow at first, then everywhere, curling into corners I hadn't expected. Each morning, I woke to a new screenshot sent by someone who thought they were helping me. Friends from the old neighborhood. Women from the book club I had left years ago. Even a man from the insurance office who had handled James's policy. "Is this about you?" they would ask, their messages laced with pity or curiosity. Some didn't bother with questions. They assumed. They judged. They closed their doors quietly, certain they already knew the story. Vanessa's posts grew bolder. She shared photos of herself standing in front of the house, arms crossed, eyes brave, with captions like, "You never expect family to walk away when you need them most." Another showed Daniel staring at the half-empty nursery they had never finished, the caption, "Dreams interrupted by betrayal." She never named me, never mentioned details that could be challenged, but the comments filled in the blanks. Her mother-in-law did this? How could someone abandon their own blood? Heartless. One post went further. She uploaded a picture of the foreclosure notice pinned to the fridge. She blurred the names, but not enough. My name was faint but visible, my signature unmistakable if you knew me. The comments flared again. Disgraceful. Imagine doing this to your own children. She deserves nothing. I stared at the image on my phone until my hands shook. The notice I had folded so carefully, the paper I had touched with trembling fingers, now paraded across screens as proof of my cruelty. My truth had been weaponized against me. The irony cut deep. At the motel, I couldn't escape it. The receptionist glanced at me differently, polite but cautious, as if she too had read the stories. A woman in the laundry room asked softly if I was all right, her tone the kind reserved for people carrying shame. Even the way strangers looked at me in the diner down the street felt sharper, as though they had heard whispers before I walked in. I tried to hold myself steady. Each night I placed James's foe beside the lamp, speaking to him as though his calm could still reach me. "They've made me a villain, James." They've told the story so well that even I almost believe it. I imagined him leaning back, folding his hands, saying what he always said when the world weighed too heavily. The truth doesn't change because people don't see it. But I felt the truth slipping, not because it wasn't real, but because it was buried. And buried truths die if no one digs them up. One night I dreamt of the house. I stood in the driveway, watching as the windows boarded themselves, the paint peeled, the grass grew wild. Neighbors gathered, whispering, pointing at me. Vanessa stood on the porch, smiling sweetly as Daniel draped an arm around her shoulders. "She left us," she said, and the crowd nodded, their faces hard. I tried to shout, to wave the red folder in the air, but no sound came out. My voice had vanished, swallowed by the noise of their judgment. I woke gasping, my pillow damp with tears. The next morning, I pulled the folder out of my suitcase again. I spread the papers across the motel table, the deed, the signatures, the numbers. Proof that I had built their dream, proof that my sacrifice had been real. I stared at the ink until my eyes blurred, then whispered, "What good are you if no one sees you?" I imagined walking into a lawyer's office, laying the folder on the desk, demanding justice. I imagined posting it online, line by line, tearing Vanessa's story apart with cold facts. I imagined sending copies to every person who had judged me, every blog that had printed her side. The fantasies made my heart race. But when the visions faded, fear crept back in. What if no one believed me? What if they twisted even this? What if my voice, after so long in silence, cracked too easily? I pressed my palms flat against the table, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my skin. A choice was coming. I could not stay in silence forever. Vanessa's campaign was building too quickly, gathering too much force. If I let it go unchecked, her version would become history. And once a lie hardens into history, it is nearly impossible to break. That night, lying in the stiff motel bed, I made myself a promise. I would not let her voice be the last. I didn't know yet how or when. But the truth inside this folder, the truth I carried like a scar, would be heard. One day soon, I would break the silence. For now, though, I whispered into the darkness, let them think I've disappeared. Let them think I'm defeated. When I speak, it will be at the right moment, and it will be the last voice they expect. The room was silent again, but in the silence I felt a spark grow steady inside me. Not anger, not revenge, something colder, something stronger. Resolve. The days at the motel bled into one another, each marked by the same rhythm of silence and small rituals. I woke at 6 whether I wanted to or not, my body trained by years of early mornings in a house that was no longer mine. The first act was always coffee, bitter and thin from the small machine in the corner, but comforting in its familiarity. I would sit on the edge of the bed, mug warming my hands, staring at the red folder on the table as if it might open itself and speak. I had stopped putting it away. At first, I kept it hidden in my suitcase, zipped under layers of folded clothes as though burying it would keep the truth safe. But truth does not need protection. It needs light. So I placed it on the table each morning, spread its papers flat, and let the black ink remind me of what I still held. 49%. My name, my claim. It wasn't only ownership. It was survival written in contracts and signatures. In the motel mirror, I barely recognized myself. My hair had grown wiry from neglect, my skin pale from the lack of sun. But there was something new in my reflection too, something sharper, a steadiness in my eyes. Vanessa would not see it. Daniel would not see it, but I did. Silence had carried me here, but silence would not carry me forward. The television in the corner hummed most evenings, filling the room with voices that weren't mine. News anchors reciting tragedies, talk shows trading gossip, sitcom families laughing on cue. Their noise was hollow, but it kept the loneliness from pressing in too tightly. Yet even through the noise, I felt Vanessa's shadow. I imagined her sitting upstairs in that house, phone in hand, words pouring into the world like poison. She thought she had already won. She thought I was erased. But I still had the folder. I began to see it differently, not just as proof, not just as a shield, as a weapon. I would sit at the table and spread out each document, tracing the lines of the deed with my finger, whispering the words under my breath like prayers. Co-owner. 49%. Madeline Russell. My voice would tremble at first, then grow steadier. It was as if I was teaching myself to believe again, to remember that no matter how loud the lies became, the truth was carved into paper that could not be erased. One morning, I carried the folder with me downtown. The air was cold, sharp with the smell of wet asphalt after a night of rain. I walked past storefronts with glowing neon signs, people rushing with umbrellas, children tugging at their mothers' coats. I felt invisible among them, a woman carrying nothing more than a red folder tucked against her chest. They could not know that inside it was my entire life, my story, my survival. I stepped into the library, a building I had not entered since James was alive. The smell of paper and dust hit me like a wave of memory. We used to bring Daniel here on Saturdays, James letting him wander the aisles while I searched for cookbooks or novels to lose myself in. Now I walked the same tiled floor alone, each step echoing louder than it should. At the desk I asked for a computer. The young woman who handed me the login slip did not look twice at me. I was just another stranger, and there was something comforting in that anonymity. I sat at the glowing screen, my fingers trembling above the keyboard, and finally typed my own name. The results filled the page. My breath caught in my throat. There it was, post after post, blog after blog, each repeating Vanessa's story until it gleamed like polished glass. A woman I had never met declared that I was selfish, that I had abandoned the family for money. Another claimed I had drained my son's resources, twisting the truth into something unrecognizable. The comments scrolled endlessly, heartless, cruel, disgraceful. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the sides of the monitor, my chest heavy with something darker than anger. It wasn't the lies themselves. It was the ease with which strangers accepted them, as though they had been waiting to believe the worst. I forced myself to breathe. Then I logged out and closed my eyes. They did not know me. They never would. But they knew a story, and stories can be more powerful than facts. Vanessa understood that. She had gone first, filling the silence with her version, and silence had let her words harden into truth. I walked to the copier with the folder pressed to my chest. I pulled out the papers one by one, deeds, signatures, bank transfers, receipts, and laid them on the glass. The machine hummed, light flashing across the documents, spitting out copies with mechanical indifference. I gathered them into a neat stack, slid them into a plain envelope, and tucked it under my arm as I left the library. On the walk back to the motel, I imagined handing that envelope to a lawyer, dropping it on a journalist's desk, sliding it into a mailbox with no return address. Each vision steadied me, made my steps firmer. The world could swallow lies whole, but truth, when revealed at the right moment, could still cut through. Back in my room, I placed the envelope beside the red folder. Together, they looked like a pair of flames, waiting for me to strike a match. That night I sat by the window, neon light buzzing outside, and whispered to myself, "It's not about shouting, it's about timing." The words soothed me. Vanessa had been clever, yes, but I had patience, and patience sharpens into something more dangerous than rage. For the first time since leaving the house, I felt calm. The silence I had carried so long was not weakness, it was preparation. And when the moment came, I would be ready. The motel room had become both a shelter and a cage. Some nights I paced its length, restless with thoughts too heavy to silence. Other nights I sat still, the red folder open on the table, whispering the words on the deed like scripture until my voice grew hoarse. Patience was my shield, yes, but patience without action could rot into fear. I knew I could not wait forever. I began small. I picked up my phone one morning and scrolled through the contacts list, names that felt like ghosts from another life. Friends from work I had not spoken to since retiring. Women from church who used to bring casseroles after James died. Even distant cousins I hadn't seen in years. Each name carried risk. I imagined their faces as they scrolled through Vanessa's posts, shaking their heads, murmuring judgment. Which of them would believe me now? Which would laugh behind my back if I dared to speak? Still, I chose one. Margaret. She had been my neighbor for 20 years before I sold the old house. She had brought flowers to James's funeral, had sat with me on the porch on long summer nights, sipping lemonade and sharing secrets. Margaret had always been steady, practical, with eyes that saw deeper than most. If anyone could hear me, it would be her. I typed a message 3 times before I dared to send it. Finally, it was simple. Could we talk? I need a friend. Hours passed before she replied. I imagined her hesitation, the way she might have weighed whether to answer at all. When the phone finally buzzed, her message was short but warm. "Of course, Madeline, come by any time." I stared at those words for a long while, tears pricking my eyes. They weren't dramatic, but they were enough. Proof that not everyone had turned away. Proof that I still had someone left in my corner. I took the bus to Margaret's the next day, the red folder tucked into my bag, the envelope of copies pressed flat against my chest. The ride felt endless, the city blurring past in streaks of gray and neon. My heart pounded the whole way, my hands sweaty against the metal bar. What if she had read everything online and believed it? What if she only invited me out of pity? When I finally knocked on her door, Margaret opened it with the same calm expression I remembered. Her hair was grayer, her steps slower, but her eyes were kind. "Come in, Madeline," she said, as though no time had passed at all. We sat at her kitchen table, a place where I had once shelled peas while Daniel played in the yard. The familiarity of it nearly broke me. I set the folder on the table between us, my fingers trembling. "I need you to see this," I whispered. Margaret didn't flinch. She pulled her glasses from her pocket and opened the folder carefully, scanning each page with the patience of someone who understood the weight of silence. She read the deed, the signatures, the bank slips, the receipts. She nodded slowly, turning page after page. When she finally looked up, her eyes met mine, steady and firm. "So the story they're telling isn't true," she said simply. My throat tightened. "No, it never was." Margaret closed the folder gently and placed her hand over mine. "Then it's time people hear your side." Her words struck something inside me, something that had been waiting for permission. I had carried the truth like a secret, heavy and hidden, but now it no longer felt impossible to share. Someone had seen, someone had believed, and that was enough to remind me my voice had not disappeared. The ride back to the motel felt different. The city lights no longer blurred into nothing. I saw people's faces, heard their conversations, noticed details I had ignored before. It was as if the world had cracked open again, reminding me that life continued beyond lies. That night, I sat at the motel table with James's photo propped up beside the lamp. "I spoke, James," I whispered, and I wasn't silenced. I imagined him nodding, his familiar half-smile tugging at his lips, pride flickering in his eyes. I spread the documents out once more, but this time I didn't just whisper the words. I read them aloud, slowly, clearly, rehearsing as though the walls themselves were my audience. My voice wavered at first, but with each line it grew stronger. By the time I finished, my chest no longer felt hollow. The lies Vanessa spun had power because they were spoken into the world. Mine had been silent, locked inside papers and pain, but silence was ending. The truth was finding its way to the surface. I turned off the lamp, slid beneath the quilt, and closed my eyes with a strange calm settling over me. Vanessa believed she had already won. Daniel believed his silence would protect him, but neither of them understood what patience could become once it found its voice. As sleep pulled me under, one thought circled steady in my mind: the time is coming. And when it does, I will not whisper. The night before everything broke open, the air in the motel felt charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I sat at the table with the red folder open, the photocopies stacked beside it, James's picture standing watch. The neon light from the parking lot flickered against the curtains, casting the room in restless shadows. I whispered the words I had been rehearsing for weeks. I gave everything. I trusted them, and they betrayed me. The sentences felt different now, stronger, less like a plea and more like a statement of fact. For so long, I had been afraid of how my voice would sound after years of silence. But when I spoke, it didn't crack. It rang steady. Margaret had been right. It was time. The next morning, I took the bus back to her neighborhood, the folder clutched to my chest like armor. She welcomed me with coffee and her steady eyes, and together we sat at her table like soldiers planning a battle. "You don't need to scream," she said, her voice calm. "You just need to show them, people will see." Her faith steadied me, but doubt still gnawed at my edges. What if Vanessa twisted even this? What if Daniel doubled down, telling anyone who would listen that his mother was unstable, vindictive, desperate? The thought hollowed me out, but Margaret squeezed my hand, grounding me. "Lies collapse when truth stands firm," she said. We printed more copies. Margaret insisted we not stop at just having them. "You need to decide who hears it first," she said. "Don't let Vanessa set the stage again." That afternoon, we walked together to the small law office downtown. The receptionist looked surprised when I placed the folder on the counter, my hands steady for the first time in months. The lawyer listened quietly as I explained, sliding each document across his desk one by one. Deed, insurance payout, transfer slips, proof of my sacrifice, proof of their debt. Proof that I had not abandoned anyone. I had built their dream with my own hands, my own loss. He leaned back when I finished, tapping the papers into a neat stack. "You have more power than you realize, Mrs. Russell," he said. "They cannot erase your name. They cannot twist these numbers. What happens next is up to you." Walking out of that office, the autumn air felt sharper, cleaner. For the first time in months, I was not only surviving, I was deciding. I could have stopped there. Could have let the lawyer handle it quietly, shield myself from the noise. But as we walked back toward the bus stop, Margaret turned to me. "Vanessa has made this public. Maybe it's time the truth was public too." Her words echoed inside me all the way back to the motel. That evening I sat by the window, watching the lights blink across the city, and I knew she was right. Vanessa had dragged my life into the open, spinning her lies for strangers. Hiding would not save me. Silence would not protect me. If I wanted my truth to survive, it needed to stand in the same light. I took out my journal and began to write. Not just facts, not just numbers, but the story. James's death, the insurance payout, the promises Daniel and Vanessa made, the small humiliations, the overheard betrayal. Line by line, memory by memory, until the pages filled with everything I had held inside. When I finished, my hand ached, but the weight in my chest had lifted. I read it aloud to the empty room, my voice filling the silence. For the first time, I imagined strangers hearing my side, not as a defense, but as a testimony. They would see not just papers and signatures, but the truth of a woman who gave everything and was cast aside. That night, I folded the journal pages and placed them with the copies in the envelope. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the hum of the air conditioner steady and low. My heart was calm. Tomorrow I would no longer be silent. Tomorrow the lies would face the weight of the truth. As sleep came, one thought pulsed steady through me like a heartbeat. They think I am gone. They think I am powerless. But tomorrow they will see me. The morning broke cold and clear. I woke before the alarm, my body restless, my mind already racing. The motel room felt smaller than ever, its walls closing in around me, pressing me toward the choice I had put off for too long. On the table, the red folder waited beside the thick envelope of copies, James's picture standing guard as always. Today, I thought, it ends. I dressed slowly, carefully, as though preparing for something sacred. A plain blouse, dark trousers, the quilt folded neatly into my suitcase. I touched James's photo before tucking it into the front pocket of my bag. "Come with me," I whispered. Margaret was waiting for me at the bus stop. She gave me a nod, no questions, no speeches, just presence. That was what I needed most. Together we rode into the city, the bus rattling over cracked pavement, faces of strangers blurring past the window. My hand stayed clenched on the envelope, my heart thudding hard enough to shake my ribs. The lawyer had given me options: pursue legal action, reclaim what was mine, let the courts unravel the mess. But I knew Vanessa had already written her version into the public. If I hid behind lawyers, the world would go on believing her. I wanted something more than justice on paper. I wanted the truth to breathe. We stopped at the small community center where a local paper was hosting an open meeting on housing issues. Margaret had insisted this was the right place. "People will be there," she said. "Reporters, neighbors, the ones who have only heard Vanessa's side." The room was crowded, buzzing with chatter. I recognized a few faces, neighbors from the street where the house stood, their eyes curious as they flicked toward me. I felt their judgment like heat against my skin, but I kept my steps steady. When my turn came, I walked to the front with the envelope in my hands. My throat felt tight, but I reminded myself of the nights I had rehearsed alone, whispering the truth into motel walls until the words no longer broke me. I looked out at the crowd and began. "My name is Madeline Russell. Some of you may have heard things about me, stories of abandonment, betrayal, selfishness. Tonight I want you to hear my story in my own voice." A hush fell. Even the skeptical eyes softened, curious. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first document, holding it up. "This is the deed to the house you've all seen online. My name is on it, 49%. This house was built on my sacrifice, on the insurance payout I received after my husband died. $180,000, every cent given to my son and his wife so their dream could exist." I laid the deed on the table, then lifted the next paper. "These are receipts, transfers, proof that I gave everything I had to build their life. I was promised a place there, promised I would never have to worry again. And yet, within months, I was pushed into a corner, treated as an inconvenience, made to feel like an intruder in the home I helped create." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I saw people exchange glances, whisper to each other. My voice grew stronger. "They tell you I abandoned them. The truth is I was forced out. They locked refrigerators, hid passwords, made jokes at my expense, plotted ways to drive me away. I stayed silent because I thought silence was strength. But then I discovered the truth. The house was drowning in debt, a second mortgage taken without my knowledge, payments missed until foreclosure loomed, and still they blamed me." I paused, the room heavy with stillness. "So I left, not because I was selfish, because I refused to carry their lies any longer. They are losing the house not because of me, but because of choices they made. And now, after months of hearing my name dragged through mud, I am here to say, enough." I spread the papers across the table like cards, undeniable, unshakable. The room leaned forward, eyes fixed on me. I felt my heart steady, my voice firm. "I am not the villain in this story. I am the foundation. And without me, there would have been no house to lose." Silence followed, deep and thick. Then the murmurs began, softer this time, tinged not with judgment but with recognition. I saw doubt flicker in the eyes of those who had believed Vanessa's posts. I saw sympathy bloom in places I thought had been lost forever. And then came the twist I had carried in silence for weeks, the truth even Vanessa hadn't known. I lifted the final paper from the envelope and held it high. "This is a release form from the bank. I could have signed it, removed myself from the foreclosure, walked away clean. But I didn't, because my name is still on that deed. And when the house falls, I will be the one who decides what rises in its place. They cannot erase me, not legally, not financially, not as long as my name lives here." The crowd gasped again, louder this time. People leaned toward each other, whispering, pointing at the papers. The twist was clear. Vanessa had spun a story of triumph, of pushing me out. But the truth was I still held the power, quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment. When I stepped down, Margaret squeezed my hand. "You did it," she whispered. My legs trembled, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. As I left the center, I knew the story was no longer only Vanessa's. The truth had found its way into the open. Not everyone would believe it, not at once. But lies collapse under the weight of proof, and I had more than enough to crush them. That night, back at the motel, I placed James's photo beside the folder once more. I looked into his steady eyes and whispered, "I spoke, James," and they listened. For the first time, the silence that followed felt like victory.